All right. Well, thank you. Welcome everybody to improving the PeopleSoft end user experience. I'm Larry Zagato with MyPro Consulting. This is session ID 101850. So our agenda today, we'll do some quick introductions, very quick about MyPro, so you know who is presenting. We'll talk quickly about the goals, what we want to take away, but 90% of everything today will be an actual demo. So, and then we'll finish up with any Q&A. And actually, throughout the demo, Rob will be monitoring the chat. So if you have specific questions, go ahead and ask him at the time. And then at the right time, when there's a pause, Rob will stop me and ask the question. All right, so just a little bit about myself. I'm a VP of Delivery, MyPro Consulting. Sorry, I'm just at the tail end of a cold. Been working in PeopleSoft for a little over 20 years. I worked at PeopleSoft for 9 years, way back when, and overall been in IT for about 25 years now. So MyPro, we are a PeopleSoft specific consulting organization. That is what we focus on. So we don't do eBiz Suite or SAP or other things of that nature. We focus in on PeopleSoft. We focus in on everything PeopleSoft, financials, supply chain, HCM, ALM. We execute on implementations, upgrades, optimizations, pretty much everything in the PeopleSoft space. Our presentation goals for today. So this is going to be an interactive demo, and we're going to go through a lot of content, and we're basically going to show you some of the tools that are available and how to apply and use those to improve your own end user experience. So hopefully you'll be able to learn some things, take that back to the organization, and come back with some knowledge about how you can leverage those to make changes, configuration changes to PeopleSoft to better and improve how you interact with the software. Excuse me. And on top of that, we'll also look at Page and Field Configurator, give you those options, how to make some small changes, eliminate those customizations and make it configuration. So, and I separate those two. They are a little bit different in terms of just how I classify them. So today we will demo Page and Field Configurator. We're going to do some drilling URLs. We'll look at simplified analytics. Take a peek at some thresholds in analytics. Look at fluid pivot grids, navigation collections. Do some personalization of work centers, and also touch on related actions or related content. With that, we're going to switch to the demo. I'm actually going to turn off my video just so we save bandwidth. So we'll do that, and we'll switch to the demo. So Rob, as soon as you can see the demo screen, if you would let me know, we'll get going.
You are good to go.
All right, thank you. And I'm sorry for my voice, it's cracking a bit. So the first thing we want to talk about is Page and Field Configurator. So I want to show you the standard purchase order page, and we'll make some changes to that using Page and Field Configurator. So if I go in and add a new PO, we can see how this is delivered. We have business unit, we have this copy to function, and we have line level information here that is interactive down at the bottom. So what I want to do is I want to change this. So we're going to change the title of business unit. We're going to inactivate this copy from, and we'll make this just display only at the line level. And there are some criteria where we can only do this for a certain business unit, et cetera, and we'll walk through that as well. So with that, I have favorites set for the time. So there is a function called Page Field Configurator. We'll go into that. And excuse me, we'll go ahead and you can see these are the ones that are set up now. We'll go ahead and we'll add a new value. Okay. And we have to know the component name, so purchase order. Okay. And I'll go ahead and I'll add that. So now what we have to do is just add a description. I'll just call this reconnect. And here we're able to add criteria. So right now there's no criteria defined. So we're going to go ahead and click on this button called define criteria. So what we're basically saying here is when would we apply these changes and what type of scenario or circumstance. So for what we're going to do is we're going to apply this only for certain business unit changes. So I'm going to select that business unit, okay, and I can have all this criteria. I'm going to choose equal to. So basically only apply these changes when my business unit is US 001. So in this scenario, if you had different business units with different requirements, perhaps they didn't need all fields, so you wanted to hide fields, or they had different names, you could use this for that type of scenario. So I'm going to click OK. So now what should happen is only when we have business unit 001 should we apply these changes. The next is we're going to make those changes that we talked about. So I click on the select field button, and I talked about the business unit. So I'm going to go ahead and take my business unit, and I want to modify the label. Okay. So instead of calling business unit, we'll just call this reconnect unit. Okay. And again, you can see here we can hide it. We can disable entry. We can set the value to blank, make it required, and put a default value in. Okay. And the other thing we talked about was the copy from. So let's see, where's my copy from? Copy from. Okay. And what I wanted to do is disable the entry on the copy from. And then the other thing we talked about doing was changing the page name, or changing the PO line from interactive to just display. So if I go down and I see my PO line, and I'm going to make it visible, but display only. So I can see everything, but I can't interact. Okay. So the next thing you could do, you see here we have a user list. So all these changes that we're making, we could actually exclude certain roles, right? Or certain user IDs. So if you didn't want these to apply to certain roles or users, you could do that. You could also make it apply to specific users or roles with exceptions, etc. So I'm not going to show you that because it requires me to log in, log out, so you can see the changes, but know that you can apply or not apply criteria to users and roles. One step we have to do is just map this. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my configuration. It's been mapped, and I want to save it. Saving the page. Okay. So now, if we go back to our purchase order, add update POs, and I click on add, you'll see that we made these changes. So no more business unit, it's called reconnect unit. Our copy from is disabled, and our line items are display only. Okay, so you can see the types of changes. Again, there are hide fields, there's required fields, things of that nature that can apply. So now this becomes a configuration as opposed to using App Designer to make these types of changes. So we also put that criteria in there. So I want to actually show you that that works as well. So if I go back to add update POs, and I change my business unit to something else, click add, right? You'll see that those changes are not there, right? So you can apply them based upon that criteria. And again, that would be applicable if you have different business units that perhaps have different requirements or different names or don't need certain fields, functionality, etc. So you can apply that. And again, we mentioned that you can apply for users, exclude users, etc. So there's a lot of options with page and field configurator. So just wanted to show that there's a new way to make these types of changes, the types of changes that we avoided all in the past because they'd be customizations that we had to carry that have much lower maintenance costs now than an actual customization. All right. So next in our list of items to demo, we've got a long list of URLs, pivot grids, etc. All of that starts with a query. And I'm not going to demo Query Manager because we all know how to write queries. But I do want to show you how to add a drilling URL. I did make a basic query that I'll start with. We can edit. So when we talk about drilling, this just says I'm using it for pivot grids, etc. So when we talk about drilling URLs, they've been around for a while, but not everybody knows that you can apply them to queries. You'll see them in pivot grids and pagelets and things of that nature, but you can actually apply it to almost any query. So if we run this query as is, just your normal standard query, you'll get the information about your business unit, your purchase order information, supplier, etc. So what's the natural next step is you'll either print this or you'll write down the specific information like PO001 business unit, EGV05. And then you go and you do your research, you got to navigate to that purchase order, etc. Well, if you add drilling URLs and then place them in pivot grids and everything else, you can avoid all that. You can make it much more interactive. So it's pretty straightforward to do that. You do so by adding an expression. And we can go ahead and click Add Expression. Okay. Our expression type, you'll see there is one called drilling URL. Okay. And in this case, I'm going to show you how to basically hyperlink to a source page within PeopleSoft. So we use our component URL. Okay. Now here, there's a few things you need. So we know that we're dealing with purchase orders. Okay. So I'm looking for manage purchase orders. And you've got to have a little bit of knowledge of components and pages, but it's pretty straightforward. And then our component, we could go to express POs here. We can go to the actual purchase order, and we're going to do that. Or inquiry, etc. So we're going to hyperlink back to our actual purchase order. Okay. And when we get there, we're going to be in add update mode. So how do I do that? So basically, I need to tell it to what to search on. So in this case, I'm looking for my keys. My keys are my business unit. Okay. So I'm going to be pulling the business unit from the query. And my other key is POID. I'm going to be pulling my POID from the query. Okay. And then we basically need to say which fields are we going to be able to select on, which is my business unit. And my POID, and then map that for the query as well, the same way, and click OK. You'll see when I click OK, it defines my expression here. I'm going to click OK. And I'm just going to save this to update it. Now, when I run this particular query, you'll see that there's going to be hyperlinks. Okay? I have we chose business unit to map and PO to map. So if I click on PO001, it'll pull in EGNBU business unit PO001, pop up a new window, and take me to that purchase order in add update mode. So here, you'll see that it pulled in the business unit and the POID. So it's taking it right from the query. I could have clicked on any one of them and it would take me to the POID. So what this does is, if you can add these to your queries, allows for much more efficient processing. You don't have to write things down. You don't have to print. You don't even have to navigate. It takes you right there. So a lot of time saving by being able to add this to your queries. So now we're going to expand upon this whole process with the next things that we'll look at. So you'll see here there's an option, kind of a shortcut from your query to publish as a pivot grid. So we are going to go ahead and do that. So when we publish this as a pivot grid, we can make this a classic pivot grid where we can put it on pages, or we can make it into a fluid pivot grid, and we'll focus on doing that and talk about why and when you would do that. So we will call this reconnect underscore. I'm just gonna make it 5 and make it recognizable. Reconnect underscore 5, and I'm going to click add. Okay. So now what you'll see is this, with this wizard, it pulls in all of these fields from our query. Okay. And we can turn them off if we want, but for the purposes of this, we're going to go through this, relatively quickly. So I'll accept all that. I'll click next. Now with the pivot grid wizard, for simple queries, it does a pretty good job. Here in this general options, you can change the labeling if you want. You can change things from axis to display or value, whether it's totaling. Anything with numbers, you have the option of summing, averaging, counting, etc. There's things you can do with trees and formatting, but we're going to just accept here that we're going to be focusing on the PO amount and summing it up. So the next, are some more options. We're going to do a pivot grid and a chart. Here, again, it's pulled in, decided that the business unit will be on the x-axis. You can filter by status, and the PO amount will be on the y-axis. So we could also add filters if we wanted to. So if we wanted to filter by buyer, we could do that. So, we're basically making some choices. There's a lot of things, grid options and display. We're going to leave those as is. And the other thing is, there's just for things that are number oriented that we're adding, summing, etc. We can define a threshold. If we click on that, then it brings up our configure thresholds. We have two options. We can have a range. We can have a distinct number. We'll do a distinct number. So I'm just going to put in 50,000 as my number. And then I'm going to say my indicator is red, and I can describe it if I want. So what we're basically doing is trying to have a visual that says when I've set my tolerance at 50,000, when something is above or below that, I need a nice visual to be able to see it. And that's what we're doing. That's what I'll show you. Now you can also create notifications. So you can certainly have the option of being visual, going into your report and seeing when something's out of tolerance. But if you want to actually know when something's out of tolerance, you can get notified of it. So you can have something that's equal to, not equal to, greater than, or less than, and you can get notified by roles or a specific user. Now, I'm not going to show that, but because again, it takes time to set up, but know that you can actually get a notification. Now, there's an app engine that runs, or a process that runs that you can schedule, because you don't want to get notified every time you pop into the pivot grid, but you can get notified. You can run it once a day, twice a day, evenings, whatever the case may be. But just know that you can also get notifications when things are out of tolerance for your threshold. Okay. So we've defined our threshold. Now the last step is we'll get a little view of what our classic pivot grid would look like. I'm going to go ahead and save it or click OK. And we basically have created a new pivot grid. Okay. So now, what do we want to do with that? So we want, in this case, I'm going to show you how to turn it into a tile. I've prepared a blank home page here, and we're going to turn that pivot grid into a tile and pop it on this home page. So to do that, we need to go to and use the tile wizard. Tile wizard is just that. It's instructions on how to take something and turn it into a tile, whether it's a nav collection or pivot grid, etc. So we'll create a new tile and reconnect 5. Keep everything consistent. Reconnect 5. I'll click next. My data type here, these are different tiles you can create. SQL, excuse me, nav collection, pivot grids. So we have to find our pivot grid name. Sorry for the coughing. So I'm going to go ahead and reconnect, search, and reconnect 5 was the pivot grid we just created. Next. Here, this automatically populated. You can add some descriptions. Owner ID, we're dealing with purchasing, so I'm going to go ahead and apply it to purchasing. And parent folder, I will show you where that comes into play, and this is public. Here you can change tile heights, widths, things like that. This means you can apply this tile to a home page, to a nav bar, to dashboards. Just gives you options of what you can do with that tile. And this last step is just a summary of the choices you've made. So then we hit publish. And now that tile should be available to us to place on a home page. So if I go back to that home page I mentioned, here I can take my action buttons. I can personalize my home page. I could add a tile. And you remember that folder I mentioned, PeopleSoft application? That's where it put it. So if I go in there, I should see my reconnect 5. There's my tile, and I'll click save. So now, excuse me, I have a tile for that pivot grid on my homepage. Now, why would you do this? So if as part of your business process, you have 1 or 2, maybe 3, you don't want too many because there are performance hits. Reports that you run, as part of your business, you get in the morning and boom, that's the first thing you do. There's opportunity here to make them as part of your homepage, right? Where you log in and you have access to it. When you click on it, it'll bring up the actual pivot grid that we created. So as you can see, it has the different filters that we set up. Buyer, business unit, the PO amount is being summed. So if we wanted to filter this and select a particular buyer, Croft, okay, it'll change the data, right? So it's interactive, allowing you to interact to the data. There's a little threshold there. We can get a better picture of it if we, select a business unit like US 003. So now we're filtering it further. See, this is the threshold, a value of 50,000. So in this case, the sum of the POs for this individual, this buyer, are beyond the tolerance that we set up. So it just allows you to visually be able to see that, and helps you make some decisions. And again, as I mentioned, you could schedule it and get an alert. Now, also, if we click on the details, it'll bring up all the data behind that content. And if you see here, right, we've got our hyperlinks that we built from that query. So we can still yet just, I'll choose a different one, drill right into and go to that purchase order. So now, as I mentioned, if you had a key report or two that you used every day to make your life easier, you pop that on your home page. You've got those drilling URLs in there. Now, you not only interact with the data to get you the information you need, but you improve your navigation, you improve just how efficiently you interact with the software. So you can kind of see how that can grow and really be applied and help you be more efficient. Sorry. The next topic.
Larry,
Yes.
is this a good place to jump in for some questions?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so first one was, can page and field configurator be used on search pages? They'd like to disable the entry on the PO ID field.
I don't know the answer, but we got the question, so we can do some research and get back to the person that posed the question.
Okay.
Yeah, and so just so everybody knows, part of the, I guess the charm, if you will, of this presentation is, you know, I'm a functional person, right? So everything I'm doing here, I don't have the background of a technical person. So part of that charm is it shows you how relatively straightforward a lot of this is. But on the flip side, I may not be able to answer some of the questions, but I'll certainly try and then follow up. Go ahead, Rob, with that caveat. Next question.
Okay. Yep. All right. Do the notifications appear in the notification bell as well?
I think so, but I will have to validate.
Okay. I think those were
it for now.
Yep, I think those are good for now.
Okay. So next topic is simplified analytics. So if you're not familiar with simplified analytics, I mean, they are for fluid, but essentially it's a way to allow your end users to create their own reports and analytics. So typically what would happen is a power user or maybe somebody from IT would set the analytic content up and what's behind the content for the end user. And then once that's set up, the end user has the ability to use all that content to create their own reports and information and queries or analytics. The value is, you know, can reduce the burden off of IT or power users for, you know, multiple query requests, especially if the query is around the same topic, but maybe just a tweak in a tune. There's some opportunity here to leverage this to support that process. So I'll take a moment to show that. So first I want to show delivered analytic. So I know that there's a delivered analytic under the supplier watch list, and this is something that, you know, Oracle has created and delivered. So if we go into that tile, you'll know that there's an analytic by over here. It's going to say add analytics. Easy way to do that. And there are some that, you know, are already here and saved. And if you click on the little setup, you can turn them on or off, right? Whether or not you wanted to display them. So know that you can do that. So as a user, I would come in, I go in my supplier watch list, right? These are the things where suppliers are not performing up to par, if you will. And say I want more information around this topic. So if I click on the Add Analytics button as a user, right, I go in and I name it Reconnect 5, and I can choose, right? You can set it up so there's different options. In this case, it's I want to know more about on-time delivery performance, and I want a chart and a pivot grid, right? And I'll click next. Now, as the power user, you or the IT person, you basically have already created this information here through a query and then a pivot grid, right? You're just through the tool set, you're changing how the end user interacts with it, right? So you can put on filters, but ultimately what you're doing is in your query and pivot grid, giving the end user what fields they can choose for their reports. So typically it's going to be around a subject area. It might be around purchase orders, it might be around invoices, whatever the topic may be. But you take the most common type of information that they query against, and you create this type of opportunity for them. So what this does is also, gives you the end user the access to this without the worry of them writing bad queries, runaway queries, hitting performance, right? Because it's being controlled by power user or IT. So, the end user may say, I don't care about periods, so I'm going to turn that off, but I do care who the buyer is, and I do care about the supplier ID, right? So they can pick and choose what information they want. They can click next, and it will automatically create a pivot grid for the end user, right? So they can do all the filtering, they can interact with the data, and they can choose to save it, right? Or not. So this one's been saved. There's publish options, so they can make this available to other users if they want. Okay. So if I go back, you'll see that we've added Reconnect 5 here. And if I wanted to turn that off, turn that one on, we can do that. There's also the option of just providing a link, which is turning on, or a tile. So if I save it, this now becomes a tile, right? So if it's a report that the user has created over and over, they can go in and do this, right? So that's when something's been delivered by Oracle. But let's say you see some value in this and you want to apply it and make this self-service option available to users. How do you do that? So I want to show you how do you do that. So we're going to go back to procurement operations. And if I go into here, my PO approval cycle time tile, you will see that there is no analytics set up. So let's go ahead and set that up so you can see how easy it is or straightforward it is. So I'm going to go back to my favorites, and now we're going to go into this thing called manage related content. Okay. So when I'm in here, I'm basically going to assign related content to an application page. This is fluid, so I'm going to unhide my fluid. I'm going to go to my fluid pages. And I'm going to go down to procurement operations. Remember, we were looking at our PO approval cycle time fluid tile. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to my page level related content. Okay. You have to have a little bit of knowledge, knowing that this is my PO approval fluid tile page. Okay. I have the option of a service or grouplet. In this case, it's analytic service. So I'm going to choose service. Then I select select. Okay. Analytic service. Now I'm looking for basically what pivot grid, right? So let's see if I can find my reconnect. Reconnect 5 pivot grid that we created, right? So it's basically saying use this pivot grid for my simplified analytic. Go and check my configuration. Basically, I want this to make sure it's public access. You already know that it's pulling in Reconnect 5. I'll click OK. I will click Save. Okay. And it's saved. So now if I go back to that fluid tile, oops, wrong one. Procurement operations, PO cycle time. You see here it is. You've added the ability for the end user to add reports using that pivot grid that we created. So essentially, you create a pivot grid around this subject content. Again, it's similar, right? We're looking at POs, right? So perhaps, they wanted more information about that PO, so they add their analytic, just excuse me, go in, and you'll see that these are the same fields that we applied to from our original query. And click next. And there's their pivot grid with all the filtering. Dig into the details. Hyperlinks work, right? So you can see where this goes, where you have the ability to apply that self-service, use the hyperlinks, all that good stuff. I won't save it since we already showed that. So you can see that we're able to really do that. Oops. I wanted to say one more thing. So the other thing I wanted to show with related content is it's not just adding a pivot grid or adding analytic. You can also add actions. So here you'll see there's two set up. In this case, creating a notification and adding the supplier to a watch list. But again, let's say we needed more information about this. With related content and related actions, you can do that. You can hyperlink. You can go to other content. So I want to show you how we can do that. So if we go back to our manage related content, manage related content service. Same process. Go right back to that fluid tile. And procurement operations and PO approval cycle time. So where before, we configured related content, okay? Now we click on configure related actions, okay? And we go down to our page level again. You can see here the notification and the watch list are there. So if I click add, I have to go to that same page here. Same one we did before, the PO approval fluid tile page. Now, what I want to show is you can see that you can do a service like we talked about. You can refer a pagelet, or you can do a content reference. So much like the drilling URL, we can go ahead and say, take me to another place in PeopleSoft, improve my navigation. So in this case, I want to say, take me to the purchase order, right? Because again, it's about how long it takes to approve a PO. So if I go to my purchase order, okay, I can go to add update POs. So basically I'm saying, take me to the add update POs, pop it up in a new window. Now I go to configure, and we have information on that fluid tile. So what I want to do is say, pull the information from that page, right? So make it a page field and use my business unit, because I know that's a key, right? So I'm going to go down to my business unit. Business unit, sorry, right in front of my face. And my other is pull in the PO ID from the page. Click on my PO ID. Okay, my PO number. Okay. And where do I want to put that link, right? We know there's already something on actions. So I'm just going to put my little drop-down list under actions. Click OK. And now I'm going to click save. Okay, so we've saved it. We've added a new action to, excuse me, that tile. So if we go back into that tile, procurement operations, appeal approval cycle time tile, I click on this, you'll see it says add update POs. So excuse me, if I click on add update POs, it's going to pull in the business unit from this field and the PO number from this field, and bring up a new window. And there you go. Business unit 3 and PO 2. So again, it doesn't have to be purchase order. It can be anything you want it to be. It can take you anywhere, and you can have multiple of them. So if you had information on here about, additional information around, say, invoices or the receipts or whatever the case may be, then you have the ability to pull in those actions and use the data from the field. Again, just making how you interact with PeopleSoft much more efficient. The other thing it gives you is if there's not all the information on a page that you'd like to see, if there's enough information to allow you to go to other pages from that page, then instead of customizing that page, you can configure it like this and just get what you want in a different manner. Now, the other thing you can do with related actions is also apply it to the pivot grid that we created, right? So again, if the drilling URL is not enough, if the interaction is not enough, and you want to do something more, we can set it up so you can do so. So I'm going to go back to the pivot grid wizard where we created our pivot grid. Okay. And I'll show you how to do that real quick. Reconnect search. Reconnect 5 is the pivot grid we created. If we go to the last step, you'll see this function here called configure related content. I'm going to click on that. And you'll see this looks pretty familiar. We just did a little bit of that. I'm going to do a content reference. I'm basically saying, I want to go somewhere else from my pivot grid. So I'm going to bring up purchasing, right? Because it was a purchase order. Let's just say, you know what? I want to be able to quickly go to my buyer work center. My buyer work center has everything I need. So I'll click on buyer work center. Okay. Now, if I go into configure, I'm not trying to take specific data because it's going to a work center. So I don't need to do any of that stuff, right? I just want a detailed view. I do want a new window. Okay. And then I click OK. And then I save it. Okay. So now, when we go back to that pivot grid, when I open it up, and I click on the data, I now have an action button that we did not have before. If I click on that action button, see Buyer Work Center. I click on the Buyer Work Center, and boom, it should bring up my Buyer Work Center. Right? So again, if you have common things that you continue to do as part of your business process that aren't exactly set up the way you want, and this can save you time and clicks and steps, those can add up fast. So it's another easy way to just improve how you're interacting with PeopleSoft. I know we're getting down on time, so I'm going to do a couple quick more things. The other thing I wanted to show is create a quick navigation collection, turn that into a pivot grid as well. So if you have users who just do a couple of things, right? They only do 2 or 3 things, right? They don't need to see the whole menu. They don't need to see the whole navigation, all these options. They only need to see what they need to see to do their job. And I know you can set things up during security, et cetera, but there's also another way that's pretty efficient, and that's by using navigation collections. So if we go to manage navigation collections, we'll create this real quick. We'll add a collection, right? So reconnect 5, save. Okay. So now I can add links or I can add complete folders. In this case, we're going to be having somebody that just has a little bit of tasks to do over and over. So we can click on the menu, right? And if we go down to purchasing, say this person specializes in requisitions. Okay. So they need to be able to update requisitions. Excuse me. And you can certainly change images and overrides and things, but I'm going to click OK. And you'll see the link there. And the other thing they do with requisitions is go to my purchasing, requisitions. Maybe they load requisitions. Click OK. Right. And I'll save it. Go to publish. Now this is where you can make it a pagelet, right? Public access. If you want to put this on a work center, you can give it a particular category, make it a navigation page, all that good stuff. So click save. So basically, we now have a pagelet, navigation collection that can be put in multiple places. But we want to make it fluid again. So I'm going to go back to my tile wizard, quickly go through this since we've seen it. Okay, reconnect nav. Data type this time is a navigation collection. And search for it. Okay, reconnect 5. Public, next, publish. Okay, so now we'll go back to our home page. We're going to go ahead and add that navigation collection. Add my tile. Connect nav, it's our tile. Save it. So now, I'm a user that has my key report, and I only do a couple of things. So I also go into my tile. You'll see here we have add update requisitions, load requisitions. So if I'm a user, I log into my home page. I've got my report. I've got my my 2 functions: load requisitions, add update requisitions. It's always going to be, this will always be on the left. This will always be on the right. So as they move through the process, right, this navigation is always going to be there. So think of how much easier it would be to train somebody. Think of how much easier their whole navigation process would be by creating them some navigation collections. So I wanted to show that. And the last thing I'll show quickly is Work Center, just some configuration options. So when we think of work centers, I'll go to the buyer work center. The main reason why some organizations don't deploy it is it's not, I guess, specific enough to that organization. So I want to show you some options where you can personalize it. So in this case, we've got our pagelets, and then we've got our content over here. Here we've got my work, which is basically your work list. So you'll see here there's this option called edit filters. So if we click on that, you'll see purchase orders, right? So you'll see right now we're supposed to have 4 to approve in our work list. Well, we can set up filters on that where you can change this, from equaling a specific business unit to specific changing the buyer, etc. So I just want to show. So if we change the business unit, in this case, business unit US 001 instead of 3 as my filter for things that I'm going to approve that come my way, we can do that. So if we refresh it, you'll see that now I don't have any to approve in my work list, right? So all of these different things have filters that you can use to apply. So you might want to, you could, increase it by multiple buyers. You could reduce it to a single buyer, business units, et cetera. It just allows you to change the content of the work list. And then, there's some personalization here as well at this level for work list, which is really more about, whether or not it's, you're showing the link, whether it's a starting page, some basic stuff. But there's also options. If we click on reports and queries, for example, as soon as it pops up. Come on. Bear with me for a moment. Okay, so you can see here, if we click on personalize, now I have the option to actually add things. So here we've got procurement queries, right? If I click on add, I can go reconnect queries. Okay. I can, type in its query name. So, oops, we can use the reconnect query that we created. Okay, connect one. We can change the title because otherwise it'll give a hyperlink name. Okay, and I click save. So now you'll see that we created our own queries. Now I click on it. There's our query with our active hyperlinks. So you have the ability to add your own queries to the Work Center and not just be limited. So same thing with reports, etc. If we go back to the main, if we go down to links, same thing. So you can actually go ahead, you can, if links aren't applicable, you can turn them off, right? You can, if you click on watch PO auto sourcing, if you unclick it, when we refresh it, that link will be gone. You can also make it a starting page. So if you don't like all those pagelets with the analytics loading, turn it off, right? Make something else like this the starting page, right? And again, click OK. Save it, and you'll see that disappeared. And if we actually refresh the page, like we would first come in to the Work Center, you'll see the analytics will not pop up, but manage requisition approvals will be the starting page. So little things like that that you can do to personalize it, and also configure. There's some options here where you can change how your things are listed in the homepage, pagelets, and all that good stuff. So there's a number of things you can do at your buyer Work Center. And with that, I think we are just about at our time. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And Rob, are there any additional questions I can try to answer or at least research?
I've got a couple that came up here. I know we're running a little low on time. We have had some help from the great audience that we have. Jim Marion, I'd like to thank you for answering several of the questions here in the chats. We do have a couple of the follow-up that we had a little bit earlier. And for the folks that answered questions that we've not been able to get to, we have, there's just a handful, and we've got those written down, and we'll follow up with you directly on those as well.
Yes, and thank you for those while I was busy demoing, answering any questions that were popping up. Much appreciated.
You're very welcome.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate it. And I guess one thing, I'll bring this up, is yes, when you fill out your surveys, don't forget session 101-850.
And just just one other comment, if anybody has folks that would like to see this, we are going to do this once more in our booth session. So please stop by and visit us at the booth, and you might be able to chance to see this one again. Or share with your friends.
Thank you, everybody.